Joining us is our Wednesday morning panel of Labor MP Julian Hill and Liberal MP Keith Wallahan. A sombre morning, gentlemen, but thanks for your time anyways. Keith, I'll start with you now. Sadly, this does happen, as Benjamin Netanyahu mentioned overnight. But given Israel was aware of the aid route, is the fog of war excuse here acceptable?
No, it's not. And we know there is something in between a deliberate, intentional act, and we will wait to see what the full inquiry and investigation says about this, and a complete accident. And you can do things to mitigate the fog of war, either through leadership or processes. And we learnt that the very hard way in Iraq and Afghanistan, where over 90% of the civilian casualties were unintentional. But again, you can do things to minimise human error. And clearly, a significant error has happened here, if that is what has happened. So we will wait for the full inquiry to be conducted. But clearly, the processes and there are leadership issues that need to be looked at if things like this are being done at scale.
And so what do you think about it, Julian? And what is the punishment, if anything, if this turns out to not be an accident?
I'm horrified, and I just want to acknowledge and pay tribute to the life of Zomi Francom. She was a Melbourne person, an aid worker, who literally gave her life in service to others. She was on the record as having helped Australians during natural disasters, during the shocking bushfires, for example, and she was over there risking her own life to feed or try to feed hundreds of thousands of Gazans at risk of imminent starvation, at death from a man-made famine, and she should be honoured for that. It is completely outrageous and unacceptable that she and her fellow aid workers were killed by an Israeli IDF mission in what was known to be a safe zone or for aid convoys. You know, you can't spin your way out of this. And the other point that I'd make, this tragedy has brought home to Australians what's happening there. But as the United Nations Secretary General said overnight, she is the 196th aid worker killed in this conflict. It is not an isolated incident. Whatever the investigations show, the only solution to this horrible conflict ultimately is a political solution for two states, but an immediate humanitarian ceasefire leading to a sustainable ceasefire, release of the hostages. For God's sake, Israel needs to let food in now. It is so unacceptable that we have over 1 million human beings at risk of dying from starvation 7 kilometres from fully stocked supermarkets and comply with international law.
Hamas has rejected the ceasefire proposal, though, Julian.
I chose my words very carefully because, of course, a sustainable ceasefire requires both parties or all parties to a conflict to agree. But right now, there are millions of people at risk of imminent starvation. You know, starvation is not an appropriate response to Hamas's horror show. And the difficult reality is this is not something Australia can solve. It's not something the international community alone can solve. It's only Israel that can decide whether they let enough food trucks in to feed people who are at risk of imminent starvation. You know, this is not the decent country that we all want to support. This behaviour of using food as a weapon of war, as they say, is unacceptable.
Keith, I asked the Foreign Minister about this a short time ago, but do you think we will get a concrete or full answer about what happened with this strike, given it is an active war zone that comes with a whole bunch of complications?
It is an active war zone, but most of the headquarters where the targeting decisions are being made are not on the front line. And again, I've served in headquarters like that they are removed from the front line. So a clinical, clear investigation can and should be expected to occur. And we know that there are moral, legal and strategic reasons why in a conflict like this, civilians should be properly distinguished from combatants. And when we see examples like this, there is a case to be made that that's not happening. And it's not happening, and that's in no one's interests. And of course, all reasonable people want this conflict to end, but in order for it to end, events like this don't help. They don't help at all. And our first duty is to Australians, and an Australian has been killed, so of course we should expect a proper investigation.
Okay, Julian, we took a long time to visit Israel in the first place after October 7. Does this show the fact that we haven't had a call from Benjamin Netanyahu yet, whereas Rishi Sunak got one? Does this show a strained relationship, if any even exists, between our two nations at the moment?
Well, Australia's a respected voice, but let's not overstate our influence, whether that's directly with the current Israeli Prime Minister or indeed in the region. Our strongest work is multilaterally with like-minded countries through the United Nations and with partners around the world. And that's just the truth of it.
Okay.
But I'd again make the point that it's up to Israel to let aid in, to comply with international humanitarian law. I understand that the Prime Minister has rightly reached out and asked for a discussion with the Israeli Prime Minister. The Israeli Prime Minister's actions ultimately are a matter for him. But the final point I'd just make, rightly as today and for months we've been focused on Gaza, we must not lose sight of the fact that the ultimate solution to this decades-long cycles of violence is a two-state solution and a political solution, and we can't lose focus on what's happening in the West Bank. We've seen an escalation of violence and an acceleration of illegal Israeli settlements that actually most Israelis themselves oppose. But we need to examine what consequences Australia and other countries should be putting on that illegal settlement enterprise, which is cruelling the prospects for a two-state solution.
Well, I mean, Hamas doesn't want a two-state solution, so there is that, which is going to complicate matters even more.
Most Palestinians and most Israelis in the bulk of the world do.
I mean, we're going down a road here
that,
they want to wipe Israel off the map. So, I mean, it's very difficult to have a two-state solution at the moment. I mean, I agree with you in the long run, but it's getting more and more difficult for that to materialise at this moment anyway. We're going to go. Julian,
but we can't lose sight and hope.
Appreciate your time. We'll talk to you soon.